So I know I've been talking about it for a while, about doing another clutch video and just kind of basically an updated method on how I've been tuning my MTC GEN 2. And I got a little bit of time to kill tonight, so I figured why not dig into it and just kind of do this now. This could be 5 minutes long, this could be 35 minutes long, I don't know. Just kind of winging it, but I'm just going to kind of break it down as to how I set up this clutch to run, basically be able to hot lap it in a no prep kind of event and not have to do maintenance every round. This is probably the most popular thing I get asked, or common thing I get asked questions about, other than how much boost do I run, is what do I do to this clutch? Or people want pointers on how to set up their clutch. And what I'm going to do is give you a method to go by more so than a setup to go by. I am a firm believer that I don't even have the instructions for this clutch anymore, for the recommendations that they give you. That all went out the window. I feel as though you can only go so fast or go so far if you're programmed to having to stick to a certain thing. Regardless of all the variables, if you just think you have to stick to certain numbers, you're never going to make any gains. You might get yourself in trouble. I just don't feel it's the way to go with these clutches. Like I was saying, I'm a firm believer that there is no magic tune-up. I can't tell you what's going to work on your bike. I can tell you or give you advice on maybe how to go about figuring out what your bike might like, but to just say, yeah, you need to run these springs, these weights, this static, these dynamics, this clutch stack, I don't believe that I can do that for anybody other than, well, not other than, just I can't do that. Between, bike length, tire, traction, shock, power delivery, power you're leaving on, power management. There's too many variables to put into just do your clutch how I do mine and you're gonna go 120, 260 foots no matter what. Ain't gonna happen. However, I feel like with this video, I can give you a very basic map of how to approach making sense of one of these, making it work, and understanding when you're not having success, possibly where to start making your changes. And there's a lot that goes into these as far as getting data and just kind of understanding that, like, okay, the track is kind of crap, I'm going to try this. Track's really good, I'm going to do that. There's just these windows that you'll operate in. You're going to know marginal track, you're going to be here. These are just the settings you know work for that. Really good track, you're going to know you're going to be leaning more towards this, or these are the changes that are going to go that direction. So I'm going to pull the cover off of this thing and we'll break it down. I'll show you exactly how mine is set up and why or how I go about figuring out what the bike likes. So let's tear into it. So it's quite possible that I might get all this done in one take, because I'm going to try to leave the camera, leave you guys over there, and I'm just going to kind of talk about what I'm doing here and just kind of probably break down some logic. So if there's moments of silence, I'm sorry, but we're going to get this opened up, and I just want to show you that this is exactly how I run it. I even have notes on the frame right here to always maintain. I run, like, if you have one of these clutches and maybe you have the instructions with you, maybe you can reference those as to compare to what I do. But I run my stack height, GSX-R 1000, at 1.5. I've tried more, I've tried less. And changing the stack height also changes how the clutch will act. If you got a really thick stack height, you're going to take away some of that air gap, and the clutch is going to act sooner. If you run a thinner stack height, the clutch is going to act later in the lever throw. And if you run a really low stack height, you can make it work. But there's a chance that if you're leaving at a little bit too low of an RPM, like you're on a two-step, you're leaving at a lower RPM, you got a real low stack height, and that air gap is large, those arms can snap out and actually engage the clutch and knock the tire off prematurely. So you have to keep things kind of, we'll say, tight. You want to give that clutch a chance to work and dig. You don't want excess RPM where, because it's an RPM based clutch. So you don't want excess RPM when you don't need it. So if you give the motor a chance to run away, it's going to throw the arms and the weights out, and it's going to lock the clutch up and knock the tire off. That's where you have to get the control. You have to control the RPM with the clutch. So I've found that my 1.5 stack height, if I remember correctly from the instructions, I'm probably on the thicker, thicker stack height side of what they recommend. But again, like I said, you can start with recommendations to try to get down the track, but I just don't feel like you're going to ever maximize your combo if you're stuck saying, I need to run this stack height because that's what they told me. Not because I have data to show otherwise, but that's what they told me. That's where people get lost on this stuff, is sticking to something because they were told that's what they're supposed to have. Play with it. You see what works. So as you can see, just cleaning up as I go. What I'm not going to do, I'm going to pull the hat off, but what I'm not going to do is pull the entire clutch stack out just for messy reasons. But what I will do is pull the pressure plate or the hat off of here and show you how I have this set. And then I'll try to get the camera in a little closer, you can see a little better. All I'm doing here is putting in, these are just screws for, like I said, if you have one of these, you know. If you don't have one of these clutches, all I'm doing here is running screws in to the spring seats for the static springs to just contain them so that the assembly comes apart easier and there's not pressure behind it. And I'm missing a screw. Where do you reckon? Oh, there it is. This is the most time-consuming part with these clutches. Is one, I don't want to use any kind of electric drill drive or anything on these because it's a lot of fine thread aluminum, and I'm not taking a chance of stripping any of this stuff out. So I do everything by hand. And of course, I grabbed the wrong size. There we go. So I'll get this apart and I'll show you the basic functions of this clutch, and then we'll talk about how I kind of approach getting this thing dialed in. And again, like, the bike makes a shit ton of power, like more power realistically than I'll be able to use at a local track. You probably heard me say it 20 times. I don't run XDA, pro street level prep. Making 700 horse and trying to 60 foot in the 1 teens, this isn't going to work. It's not why I built the bike, and it's not what our local, track 3 nights a week that we go, whatever, sometimes it's not what that track will hold. But will the track on a marginal surface hold, a mid to low 120 60 foot? Absolutely, because that's what I've got this bike, basically programmed to do. Even in the track we go down there for testing, even if the track is really, really good and I feel like I can probably throw a bunch more power at it and really get after it, I don't, because changing everything about this clutch for one situation out of 10 doesn't make sense to me. I leave it alone to what I know will work, and that's how I'm going to go from there. All right. So we'll stick this back in because we don't need to pull this all apart right now. If you watched my last video, I believe you probably watched me go through all this anyways. So we'll leave that alone. And what we'll do is I'm going to pull this apart so you can see when I run for static pressure. Now this is probably gonna, like, if you have one of these clutches, this might freak you out a little bit. But like I said, this is what I've figured out makes the bike work. And maybe the similar situation will work for you. And I'm gonna try to show you this, but I gotta make sure the camera's on it. So you see what I'm doing here? I run all 6 springs, and look at the shims I run. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 shims in there. 4 of them are the 50 thou shims, and then a 25 thou. That's how much static I'm running in this clutch. So this is now we're going to chat a little bit. How should I start? I approach the tune-up on this is a lot of people are worried about putting on the 2-step, throwing the lever, and either spinning the tire or flipping the bike or burning up a clutch. The burning up the clutch thing is just going to have to be you don't have to burn up a clutch, but if you're worried about it, you got to train yourself that when something's not right, lift. Don't keep making a pass if it's just all RPM and blowing through the clutch. Lift. You're not going to gain any data, and it's not going to be a record hero pass. But how I've approached this now is I started out basically with no nuts and bolts and no weight on these arms. I tried running the suggested tune-up. I've talked to other people that ran similar stuff. I've tried things that they recommended. Nothing worked 100%, but little bits of info that I've got from people, from talking to people, different setups, their techniques and theories and a little bit of info, it applies, just not as a whole. So I've constantly had to go back and, okay, we'd try this tune-up. It didn't work. Let's start from scratch. So I was constantly starting from scratch because I wasn't gaining any ground. I could make it be like okay, but it never got better. So I kind of came up with my own strategy now. We're going to take it slow and step by step. So what I did is, like I said, I took the nuts and bolts off and no weights on the arms. So we didn't have to worry about this thing getting into the RPMs and locking up the clutch and flipping the bike over or doing a wheelie or something stupid. I was only shooting for 60 foot. So what I do is I use the static pressure. Basically, this thing is like riding a hand clutch bike with slightly softer than what a big power hand clutch bike would have. So slightly softer setup than that, because I do have the ability of sliding the clutch mechanically and then letting weights do the work down track. So I don't need to have just a ton of static pressure. But I run a good amount of static pressure, and what that does is, one, when you throw the lever, the clutch acts faster with more static. So now this gets into where we're talking about stack height. I run enough stack height so that these arms don't get a chance to get a bunch of RPM behind them and wing out and hit the clutch hard and spin the tire. So the stack height is thick enough that air gap, I keep saying air gap, but the amount of room or distance the arms have to make up as they sling out is less. Basically, when I'm on the 2-step, the arms are already just starting to, we'll say, to take the slack out. They're not really applying pressure yet, there's just the slack is out. So I use static pressure to get me through the 60. I basically launch this bike like a hand clutch bike. Granted, I'm still throwing the lever, but if you got a hand clutch bike and you're making a ton of power, you're probably almost throwing the lever anyways, because horsepower will make a slider out of anything. But I'm using static to get me through the 60. Now I don't have to worry about these coming in until after the 60. So I did a lot of half-ass, we'll say 100-foot passes to get data to see what static this bike wanted. Once I got the bike to basically not completely blow the clutch out, just slide through the clutch, and also not knock the tire off, that's the static I landed on. And the arms and the weights will eventually start to play a role in your 60 foot. I'm not relying strictly on this. I just decided to approach it with just the static to see how I could get the bike to 60. Because if you're using too much of the weights and the arms in the first 60 feet, they're not helping you down track at all. I mean, well, a little bit, but you kind of want to keep your weights in your arms for, you know, for down track. I don't know how else to kind of phrase that. If you're applying pressure and everything with the weights and arms too, you know, up too close to the 60 foot, I just feel like that's where you're going to get into trouble, where you're going to have a hard time keeping the tire under the bike. Might start knocking the tire off because you're really bringing the clutch in. And again, this is where I said that there isn't one tune-up that's going to work, because a lot of it has to do with power delivery. But that's why I said I'm going to kind of tell you how I approach tuning it, and I'm monkeying around with power delivery a little bit, but I don't know what your bike makes for power, or the next guy, or how you're managing that power. So that's how I'm starting out with this: is 60 foot static. Get the thing to 60 as best I could with just basically tuning on the static springs. So we talked a little bit about the stack height. I run a little bit thicker because I like that clutch to start doing something as soon as the lever's coming out. You don't want the motor to run away from you. And what I mean by run away is, like I said, this is an RPM based clutch. So if you have a switch on your clutch lever that's operating your two-step, and it comes off the two-step as soon as you start to release the lever, if that clutch isn't starting to engage as fast as you move that lever, if it comes off the two-step too fast, you're going to get a ton of RPM before it ever actually starts to apply the clutch. That's where you're going to get a runaway condition, where the RPMs are going to spike faster than the clutch is engaging. And now if you got weights and bolts and everything on these arms, they just came out and locked up the clutch and probably knocked your tire off. Or it dead hooked it and killed it, or you wheelied. So you have to, and I use my static to do this, you have to control the engine RPM. You have to, whatever you're leaving on the two-step, when you throw that lever, you can't let the RPMs run away. It has to control that. It has to grab those RPMs and at least hold them. If there's a dip, that can happen, but ideally, if say you're leaving at, I leave at 8,000 RPM roughly on most passes, I don't want to see a big 8,000 RPM, 8,000 RPM leave. I don't want to see a big dip down to 6,000 and then have to have it climb out of that hole. It's not as bad on this bike because, as you know, I run more compression than normal. So even if I have an RPM dip and it dumps a little bit of boost, it makes enough power on nuts to pull through that and not really nose the bike over hard. But if you got a low compression, old school turbo motor style, and you lose 2,000 RPM at the hit, you probably just lost all of your boost, and it's going to take a while to recover that. So I leave it 8,000 RPM, and I look at the data log, and I want to see it stay at 8,000 or slowly jump up. Say it jumps to 9,000, but I want it to control it. I don't want it to leave it 8,000 and jump to 12.5 and just get on the limiter before the bike ever starts to move. So that's, I'm going to keep mentioning this static. I run a lot of static, but this is what catches the motor. But it's also not too much that it's going to knock the tire off instantaneously. So I'll leave it 8,000 RPM, and my bike will jump just a little bit up depending on power. Again, power makes a difference. If I'm leaving on, say, 10 pounds of boost as opposed to 5 pounds of boost, that 10 pounds of boost is going to drive through the static more than what 5 pounds would. That's where I'll get an increase in RPM, which is also a tuning tool. I can kind of control what that motor is going to do at the hit, as well as what the chassis is going to do. So ideally, I look for, whatever RPM I'm leaving at, even 7,500 RPM. I want the bike, as soon as that lever moves, I need the clutch to start acting and grab the RPMs. So I don't want to spike, I don't want to dip. I want to catch the RPMs, maybe a little bit on the high side, and then start climbing out from there. But that's how I approached this, is with the static. Ton of passes to get the 60 foot figured out. That's where I ended up. And I also think this is why I don't go through a lot of clutches. I run enough pressure down low to basically keep the thing from just sliding and using a ton of horsepower and RPM and just sliding through the 60 foot. I catch the RPMs fast and let the power pull the bike through the 60. And this thing actually, I don't even start adding boost until about 1.3 to 1.4 seconds in the pass. So if I leave it 8 pounds, it's 8 pounds through the 60 foot. The chassis is happier, the motor's happier, the clutch is happier. Because do you know how complicated it can be to start adding boost through a 60 while trying to tune a variable clutch? Take a variable out. If you're turbo, nitrous, whatever, try to... Again, these are just my theories. I know there's people out there who probably do stuff totally different that are faster than me. But I'd like to think that when I can hot lap this thing 5, 6, 7 times in a row, that I kind of got something figured out. But I'm also not going max effort. So this is where you got to take what I'm saying with a grain of salt and just maybe just for general knowledge, just techniques. Like I said, add it to your mental toolbox and say, you know, if you're at the track, go, hey, I saw a guy that tunes his clutch this way. Let's attack it like that. So I'm hoping that's what you get out of this. But now we got our 60 foot figured out. And now we're going to start running the bike out 100 feet, 200 feet, whatever it takes until we start feeling like that clutch is starting to really slip. And again, you got to be conscious of what the bike is doing. Look at data logs, feel what the bike is doing. When it starts to slip, get out of it. It's not going to get better as you start putting more power in down track. That's where we start coming with the weights in the arm, or the weights on the arms. Now, there's 2 things going on here. You have dynamic springs that are in here behind this cover. There's dynamic springs in there which control how fast your weighted arms come out. I don't run, as you can see if you're looking here, I don't run a ton of weight on this clutch. I got 1 washer on there and a nut and a bolt. And if I remember right, the steel nut and bolt that I have in here is 7.7 grams each. And then the washer I got is 1 gram. So I got 8.7 grams on each arm. You want to run a consistent amount of weight. You don't want to be screwing with different spring rates and then changing the weights on the arms, because you basically can just totally negate anything that you're shooting for. Say you have 3, we'll just say for reference right now, we'll say you got 3 soft and 3 stiff springs in here, and then you're changing the weights on the arms. If you're running different weights on the 3 soft as compared to the 3 weights on your 3 stiff, you don't really know when they're actually going to start acting. You could have basically made them all act the same, or you could have taken your stiff springs and added too much weight to them, and now it's acting like a soft spring. So it's a whole nother wormhole you can get in there. So don't get in over your head. Keep it simple. These things work really good with very simple setups. But if you keep your weights on your arms the same, it's 1 less variable to screw with you, and it also will make everything more consistent. I do run 3 different, or 2 sets of springs in here for our dynamics. I'd have to try to remember. I do them by, I measure the overall length of the spring, so I don't even remember what MTC numbers I'm at, because they'll have the numbers, the 10s, 12s, 15s, whatever. If I'm thinking right, I have 18s and 21s. I think that's what they were. But I run, like I said, I measure the length of them, and then if you look in my little bin here, I got my bins of springs, and they're numbered or labeled by their length. Longer the spring, the more pressure it's going to have, because they compress into the same size pocket. They all go in the same area. So I'm almost positive I'm running 18s and 21s. And what I'm doing with the stiffer spring like that is I'm delaying how far down those stages start to come in. And the 18s and 21s are pretty close, but it also makes a real smooth transition. I don't have any like abrupt clutch movement, I should say. It's not like the clutch is, it's 1 arm and weights, or 1 set of springs and weights is coming in and hitting it, and then another one's coming in and hitting it. I'm kind of exaggerating how abrupt it would be, but the clutch feels that, even though I'm making it act like it's going to pull you back, but the clutch feels that when one arm comes in, another one waits and then comes in. I just want to smooth that out. So I'm using stiffer springs to try to hold off on these weights and arms coming in way up front. Even though it's RPM based, I'm not getting to, we'll say I shift at like 13,000, 13.2. So we'll say I'm not at 12,000 RPM by the 60 foot. It, except the clutch catches my RPMs, holds it, and it starts to climb after that. After that 60, the RPMs come up. That's when I want these arms to start engaging. I want to get my 1-2 shift, and then we're at max RPM, and these arms are coming in. And I only add, so I'm kind of jumping around a little. So I started out, static springs got me through the 60. Then I started with just the nuts and the bolts. And I kind of wanted to see where that started taking that slip out of the clutch now. So we ran it, 100 feet out. It started to slide. My static springs weren't holding any more power. So then I added the nuts and the bolts, which that by itself, like I said, was 7.7 grams each. That started to take that slip out. It held off on that slip now. I got to about, this has been a while now. I want to say I got about 400 feet out now, and that slip started to come back. Now we're up higher in the gears, so the mechanical leverage is kind of gone, and that clutch, or the motor wants to drive through the clutch. So I just started playing with weights then. I added one washer. That basically got me through the 8th mile. I added 2 washers, which was another, well, actually I have 1.2 gram and I got 1 gram. I think at one point I had 3 washers on each arm, and it basically was making the clutch so aggressive down track that it would just spin the tire and it would lose mile an hour. It would still ET okay, but it would spin the tire and it nose over. It's not accelerating anymore when it's spinning the tire. So then I started backing the weights off again, and this is where I landed, was with 1 nut and bolt on each arm, 1 weight, 1 gram weight on each arm. That gets me a solid tune through the 8th without totally knocking the tire off, but also keep in mind that this is a lot of no prep stuff. This isn't a super glued kind of track that I'm dealing with. So if I ran a bunch of weight and washers on these things, I could knock the tire off in the first, I could knock it off at the 60 and haze the tire all the way through the finish line if I wanted to. So I am controlling a little bit of clutch slip, but more so I let the clutch kind of do its thing, and I play with power, because then I'm not worried about destroying clutches, and I think that's where I'm able to run back-to-back passes with nothing more than I just pull the cover off and put a fan on it because I can. But I think that's where I'm gaining ground, is by not letting the motor drive through the clutch all the time, and basically doing more power delivery. And so I really hope I'm kind of breaking this down logically, and I know I'm probably talking fast and kind of erratic, but the whole gist of this video is, for me, just kind of relaying this to you. If you're afraid of these clutches, don't be. If you're stuck in no man's land, don't be afraid to try something different than what everybody tells you you have to do. Start breaking it down. Go simple. Simple will always get you down. Take all your weights and everything off. Start with your static. Just get the bike to leave. You should always be able to have enough static to get the bike to 60 foot, or at least 30 foot. Figure it out from there. So that's my method here. Static for 60, springs for slightly farther down track, and start adding weight for you start getting down to the finish line. And just watch your clutch wear. This thing came apart a lot when I was figuring this out, and I was measuring discs. I was looking for wear and heat, and once I figured out that I wasn't really seeing the wear it was starting with, I knew we were onto something. So like I said, I hope this makes sense. If you got any questions about how I'm doing this, or something's not quite making sense, because I'm going to go ahead and edit this video, and there's a good chance I maybe misspoke on something or wasn't real clear, but this is it. There's no magic gremlins in there making this thing work. You gotta you got to do it yourself. And like I said, don't be afraid to try something. Don't fall victim to that. I have to run these numbers because that's why. And you don't have any real data for yourself behind that. That drives me nuts when people are constantly chasing a number, a spec, a measurement. For what? You don't know if that's what your setup wants, more or less. Play with it. These things are freaking toys, man. Go make changes and go fast. So I think that's where we'll button this one up. I'm going to put this back together and then probably get the other bike on the lift, and we got to start doing some stuff to that to get ready to go racing. So thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.